The second in our Anatomy of Faith series, the eyes have it. Okay, we have a few new people here tonight, people who may have missed the first class, and we really didn't finish the first class completely. So before I start speaking about eyes, I'm going to recap a couple of points from the first class. The Chovos HaLevavos, great Musar classic, The Duties of the Heart, speaks about the various ways of perceiving God. And the three main avenues are through the Torah, through nature, but then he says that the best way, the most immediate way, is through our own bodies, through our own physical plants. And it's really from this passage, Chovos HaLevavos, I took the inspiration for this class, and it could really be much more than a three-part series, but we are constrained by my own ignorance of anatomy and biology primarily. That's really what's holding us back. But suffice to say that he bases this on two biblical passages. Number one is the pasuk in Eov that was in the handout in the flyer. Mibisari echza Elokai. From my own flesh I will behold God. Hence the title of the series. And as well the pasuk in Tehillim that says Kol atzmosai tamarna Adoshem Yichamoch. It's co-op, those of you who go to shul on Shabbos and say the Shabbos Psukei Zimra, songs of praise, probably recognize that as part of the liturgy of Nishmas. Kol atzmosai tomarna Adoshem Yichamoch. All of my bones will declare, will say, God, who is like unto you, who's comparable unto you. So there are many ways to interpret it, but the Radak in the second interpretation says that this is an echo of the sentiment of this verse in Eov. From all of my bones, from understanding the ecosystem, if you will, of our biosystem, from understanding the tremendous harmony and the interplay of the various bones in the skeletal structure, but it means beyond. Bones is being used colloquially over here. Every digit, every organ, every nerve ending, every sinew, okay? The wonders of each one individually, and in particular, the wonders of the way they're balanced and how they work in harmony and in concert. From that itself, I can come to praise God, and basically this means on two levels. One is the level of a study of anatomy, a study of biology, and the conclusion being what is popularly known in modern day culture as intelligent design. And I quoted Paley last week, the idea that the same way a watch, the intricate workings and the moving parts of a watch and the function of a watch bear mute testimony to the intelligence and the plan of the watchmaker. If you want to be more artistic, the same way a Michelangelo sculpture or a Da Vinci painting speaks about the great craft, the great genius, if you will, of their composers, the great Beethoven symphony, so too does the human body, a work of art in its own right, bear testimony to the intelligent designer. However, if you were here last week, you know, that's not really going to be the emphasis of the series, nor is it going to be the emphasis of tonight. On what I consider to be a deeper level, it's very convenient of me to think so, since I'm not a biologist, and I have a basic middle school working knowledge of anatomy, but I'm a bit of a rabbi. On another level, what it means is using our physical plant, Mibsari echza Elokai, from my flesh I will behold God, using our bodies, approaching our bodies, and even the science of our bodies, with the sensibility, not necessarily of a scientist, but of a poet. To see the metaphor, to see the allegory, to see the simile between what we can physically perceive and the spiritual abstractions that we are to believe. Ethical, moral, spiritual lessons can be derived from a study of the body and from its various component parts. So before I embark on a few examples of this, and then hopefully within a little while we're going to segue into the eye, let me tell you how there's a little bit of a confluence between these two approaches to, quote unquote, from my flesh will I see God, and the sense of awe and humility that we have to bring to the enterprise. The Rambam writes in his classic philosophical work, Mar Nevuchim, The Guide to the Perplexed. This is from the second section, 17th chapter. He's talking about the Aristotelian heresy as far as Jews are concerned, the idea of ha'olam kadmon is the way the Rambam, I don't know the Greek term for it, the way the Rambam and other Jewish writers have always referred to it is the idea of that there is no creator, the extant world, the world that we see it, was always here. Which in the Rambam's times was a anti-religious view. We as moderns living in the 21st century understand that it's a wholly unscientific view as well. To say that the world full-blown, the cosmos full-blown, or a particular species full-blown, as we see it today, is what always was, is the thought of a primitive. A brilliant primitive, perhaps like Aristotle, but still a primitive. At any rate, he's trying to debunk this notion, and he has a beautiful allegory. He says, try to imagine an adopted child living in a female-free society. Think of a desert island, okay? This person has never seen a pregnant woman. He's certainly never witnessed childbirth, and has only the dimmest memories of his own childhood and development. And somebody, his father, his adopted father, starts explaining to him the idea of human reproduction. Okay, I don't have to belabor the points. We're all familiar with the basic particulars. And the son starts asking the father questions. He says, I don't understand. Every human being that I've ever seen, okay, had his mouth opened and his navel closed. You want to tell me, you're talking to me about embryos and fetuses, and you want to tell me that this was a life form that existed, that lived, that was developing, and the opposite was true? The mouth and the eyes were closed, and the navel was open? If a person would have an aperture, if a person would have a puncture in their belly button for any amount of time today, they'd die. You're telling me that the kid, as we call him, the embryo, did not chew, did not swallow, and yet was sustained? All human beings that I've ever seen, the ones that are in front of me, before me, observable phenomenon, okay? The opposite is true. You stop eating, you stop drinking for a couple of days, you're dead. And you're telling me that this baby survived this way for 9 months? You're telling me that the baby was enveloped in a fluid environment and was not breathing. Well, at least that part a little bit begins to make sense. I know what happens to any human being I've ever met if you submerge them in fluid. Even if they were breathing before, they will cease breathing, but they cannot go on living under those circumstances. In other words, says the Rambam, Aristotle's mistake, at least in this perception of reality, is you cannot take what is before our eyes and extrapolate things that we have no experience with, things that came before us that are beyond our ken. So even though we want to approach this as, like I said, a combination of scientists and poets, okay, we have to understand that even advanced 21st century science, and I once studied that, I was privileged in my early years of the Jewish Heritage Center, I had a TTP, as we call it, a tutorial program. I was mentoring a doctor, an MD, and he was talking about his continuing education and his frustration with his continuing education. And he says, Rabbi, our scientific knowledge is growing so exponentially right now. It's like trying, my brain feels, his metaphor was, so it's like you're trying to hold up a little teacup, a little demi-task teacup, to a fire hose, you know, spritzing out that water with that kind of water pressure. I mean, your mind bursts. That's how exponentially if I would have to keep up with my reading, keep up with every new medical study and every new breakthrough and every new theory, you know, it's just impossible. Right? That said, we have to understand how much yet remains unknown. Okay? That's just something that I want to give as a Hagnama, and again it echoes the word, since our guide throughout this series is the Chavos Halvados. I want to read and transfer for you another beautiful quote. It's called, the Nus was here tonight to corroborate my translation. But he's going through, he's waxing rhapsodic about studying the various biological processes and the various systems, the nervous system, and the respiratory system, and so on and so on, how much we can learn from it, how much we can be inspired. And then he says, this is in the Shar HaBechina, the 5th chapter, He says as follows. The to'elas ha'evarim she'ena yadu alanu. The salutary effects, the advantages of the limbs, which is unknown to us. Okay, this is a medieval sage writing. There was a lot more unknown then than there is now, but there's still a tremendous amount that's unknown. What's the function of an appendix? We know that people can live without an appendix. Okay, evolutionary biologists have been left scratching their heads. They don't. It's called an appendix in a certain sense. It's an appendage to the body with no discernible function. I mean, people don't do preemptory appendectomies. Usually, well, look, it could the abscess, it could burst one day. Let me get rid of it right now. That's not exactly the approach, but nevertheless, we know we seem to live fine and function 100% without an appendix, which is a fairly sizable organ. What its function is a mystery, right? There are probably other parts of the body, and I want to touch on that a little bit later when I talk about the eyes. Says the Chovos HaLevavos, the to'elos ha'avram she'eni yadu alanu, hi rabba ala to'elos she'ken yadu v'niris lanu. He says the help, the advantageousness, the salutary effects, the good points of having, shall you say, organs and cells, which is unknown to us. We don't know what they're good for. He's testifying to us. They're better for us than the ones that we do know what their function is all about. Which is whatever. Okay. Fine. So I think the Rambam and the Chovos HaLevavos are saying the same thing in two different ways. Okay, so let's talk about the body of metaphor as metaphor. I want to give you some example from some great Jewish writers and thinkers, how they learned lessons about the nature of the Torah and about the nature of serving God from various parts of the body. Let's start with the hair. Okay? This is an insight from the Chozeh of Lublin, one of the great Hasidic masters, early evangelists, if you will, of the Hasidic movement in Poland. One of the first generation Polish rabbis, Hasidic masters. The seer of Lublin. Good man to quote on a night when you're talking about eyes. He's talking about the boldness of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, as we all know, is one of the greatest of all Talmudic sages. And there's another Talmudic sage who's known as Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. Rabbi Joshua, the son of the bald one. And according to many commentaries, he was a son of Rabbi Akiva. And the question is raised among the commentators. You would think that Torah sages and the Talmud, a work that's so sensitive to the laws of Lashon Hara, of gossip, of malicious speech, of defamation of character. Let's say he had this physical infirmity, if you want to even call it an infirmity. I mean, it's male pattern baldness. It's something, don't have a good rug. But I'm saying, what's the big deal? Why concentrate on the baldness? I don't know. Maybe in those days, maybe it was a thing of beauty. Maybe Yul Brynner or something like that. An ancient Yul Brynner. I don't know. Be that as it may, that's the question. What are we calling Rabbi Akiva the bald one? And this is the best explanation that I heard. Let me see if I brought the right paper here. I brought a lot. Let me see if I brought the right one. No, of course I left this one upstairs. Okay. I'll have to... No, I have it right in front of me. Talk about eyes and blind spots. Okay. It says as follows. This is a passage of the Talmud, Mesechus Menachos, 29b. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, at the time that Moshe Rabbeinu ascended to heaven, that is to receive the Torah, he found God tying crowns onto the letters of the Torah. Now, let me stop, let me pause, and let me explain what that means. Any of you who have seen scribal halachic calligraphy, okay, it doesn't have to be in a Torah scroll, you can see it in a mezuzah, you can see it in, some people read the Parak Shira today with the Ksav Ashuras, as it's called, with the scribal arts calligraphy, or Parshas HaKtoras, whatever. It's out there, you can see it. We'll notice that certain letters have what we call tagin. Tagin are called crowns, tiaras. Basically what they are is these little saliences that come out from the tops of the letters.
Right.
So this is a metaphoric way of referring to that. God was tying crowns onto the letters. This means the tagin, those little protuberances, those little saliences that come out of the letters. Amlafanav, Rabbanu Shalom. Moshe said to God, Master of the world, Master of the universe, who's preventing you? Which really means, what's motivating you to do this? Or who's preventing you from stopping from doing it? What are you doing here? The letters are the letters. I understand you have to communicate your will to your creatures. That's the idea of giving the Torah. What are these little crowns on the letters all about? Is it just doodling? What's it there for? Amar lo, God said to Moshe, Adam echad yesh, there is one person who is going to exist at the end of many generations, and his name is Akiva, son of Joseph. That was Rabbi Akiva's full name. Who is going to interpret on each and every salience, on each and every coat, it's called a tail or a point, growing up, tilei tilin shel halachas. Okay? Mountains upon mountains of halachos. This really echoes another drush of Chazal. If you take a look, you have your sitter on the table. Take a look. I don't know. What?
I don't understand what it has to do with Rabbi Akiva's boldness.
I'm not done yet.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Sorry. These are not sound bites. You have to maintain the train of thought. Not only for a long shtickle tire, but through my very long-winded delivery. I'm sorry about that. Okay. Now, let's take a look. Unfortunately, I think that this may be a part of the Art Scroll Siddur that's not actually translated, so you'll have to trust me on this one. Take a look in your Art Scroll Siddur. This is wrong. Perek Hey? Okay, yes. That's line. Oh, the risk that's line. Okay. My database failed me. I don't have it. You'll just have to you'll have to take the translation of the pasuk without my phone. No, there's something in Shir HaShirim. Shir HaShirim is the Song of Songs. It's an allegorical poem written by King Solomon, one of the three works of the biblical canon, written by King Solomon. And this is an allegory for the love between the Jewish people and God. At any rate, describing the male of this love duo, there's a passage that says, Kvutzos of Taltalim. Okay? Basically, his locks, think Fabio, think a nice perm, Kvutzos of Taltalim. It means his locks are Taltalim, are these like cornrows, these beautiful rows of tresses. That's the simple meaning of it. But the way the Medrash deconstructs it is as this. Kvutzosov, the Hebrew word kvutzosov, is related to coats, to this idea of a thorn or a protuberance, a salience. Right? Taltalim, kvutzosov taltalim, al kol coats v'coats. Right? On every little protuberance, tilei tilim shel halachos. There's going to be mountains upon mountains of halachos, of Jewish law, Jewish ritual law. Says the Chos of Lublin as follows. Torah scholarship is determined by how deeply can you plumb the depths of the Torah, the encoded messages of the Torah. And not all scholars are created equally. It says that Ben Zoma used to try to understand kol esen shabbatorah. There's a Hebrew word es that's really untranslatable. And he had something that he could derive from everyone. And finally he came to a verse that said, Es Hashem Elokecha Tira, and he didn't know how to interpret it. And Rabbi Akiva came along and said, no, Es Hashem Elokecha Tira, be in awe of the Lord your God with an S. An S is some kind of an addendum to that. Rabbi Akiva said, that's to include Talmidei Chachamim. Torah scholars, you should be in awe of as well. That's our halacha. You're supposed to have honor and awe of Torah scholars. Says the Chos of Lublin. Hair on the human body is something extraneous. It's not really alive. It's part of our bodies, but it's inert. You cut any part of your flesh, there's a nerve ending, you're going to feel something. Some parts of the body are more sensitive than others. Okay? People don't go to the barber or to the beauty parlor and start screaming when they take a scissors to them. Oh, you hear it. Right? It's dead. It's inert. It's extraneous. Even though it's outside the body. It's connected to the body, but it's outside the body. It doesn't seem to have any real function within the body. So somebody can say, okay, that's something extra. It's extraneous. Okay? What does a bald person mean? A bald person means nothing is extraneous. There's no hair. There's nothing extraneous. Rabbi Akiva, as it were, right? If he can get halachos, not just homiletic, real, hard, solid meat and potatoes Torah, as it were, not only out of the extra words, out of the S, but out of the kutzin shel yud, out of those little saliences, those little crowns, those little hair-like protuberances that are coming out of the letters, he's bolded the letters of the Torah. Everything is part of the body of the Torah. There is nothing extraneous. Says the Chazal, I don't know if he was physically bald or not. It's beside the point. He was called the bald one because he made sure that the Torah had no hair, as it were. It's all living, it's all organic, it's all part of the organism. Try to think of not getting a haircut, but your hair being sucked back in by the roots, a bunch of ingrown hairs all over your body, on the top of your head. That's the idea of Rabbi Akiva. That's how the Chayz of Lublin understood the metaphor of baldness for Rabbi Akiva. I'll give you another one. Rav Tzadok of Lublin says as follows. We know that within the human organism there are what we would call in English vital organs. In Talmudic language, jargon, it's called Eivarim Shaneshama Tluya Behen. There are certain organs within the body that the very life force, the soul, depends upon them. Okay? You can do heart surgery, but you can't do a heartectomy like you can do an appendectomy. Right? God forbid, it shouldn't happen to anyone. Nobody wants to be an amputee, but there are amputees who go on living many years after the amputations. Right? But there are certain organs in the body that are just indispensable. You lose them, you're dead. We can argue, we can debate heart death versus brain death from today till tomorrow. There are other organs in the body. You remove both lungs, you'll die. Right? Remove both kidneys, you'll die. You remove the entire liver, you will die. Right? There are other organs in the body which we like to have for optimal functioning. You'd like to have them, but you can get by with only one lung. Okay? Kidney donations from live donors are routine in modern medical technology. Okay? Again, I'm sure the optimal function, it's great to have two kidneys, but you can get by on one. Once you get more to the extremities, again, there's parts of the body that you can do away with. And then you get, like I said, the hair, the nails, totally extraneous, right? In a certain sense. Says Rav Tzadok HaKohen, that's a mashal, okay, on two levels. First of all, it's a mashal for how sanctity, how holiness operates and diffuses through the world. It's a famous Mishnah in Midos, Tractate Midos, Esa Kadoshosem. There are 10 levels of sanctity in the land of Israel. And the epicenter of the sanctity is the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies in the temple. He says, think of the Holy of Holies in the temple as a beating human heart. Okay? As it radiates out, you circulate, there are major blood vessels, and there are tiny capillaries at the extremities of the body. The very furthest flung boundaries of the land of Israel, that's as far as, if you want to say, the life force of Kedusha goes. On another level, we know that the entirety of the cosmos would disappear without godliness suffusing through it. Maybe those are the extremities. Right? But the point is that the further you get away from the vitalist organs, in a certain sense, the more dispensable, if you will, you are to the entire organism. But more to the point, not a question of dispensable or indispensable, the less you're feeling the life force, if you will. Right? People who have circulation problems start feeling cold in their extremities, and the closer they are to the heart, to the pump that's circulating the blood throughout the body, the less they have problems with cold or other circulatory problems. It's in your extremities that you have a problem. He says, so it goes with Kedusha. If we understand as God, as spirituality, as the animating force that keeps the cosmos going, so the further radiated out, in a certain sense, if you will, from this Kodesh HaKadoshim, from this heart, beating heart of the cosmos that is the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem, the further you are away from it, the less the Kedusha, if you will, is felt. The less the influence of the heart's circulation and or the brain's nerve impulses is felt. That's what Tzaddik says. And finally, this is a very rabbischwartzlegacy. We can't forget that Rabbi Tzaddik was a member of the Chassidic movement. He said, what this is really alluding to is the structure of the Jewish people. Those of you who were here for last week's class know that there's a corollary between the temple compound in Jerusalem and the structure of the Jewish people. So it's the same way. There are certain souls, if you will, in each and every generation that are the very life force of the generation. And the closer you get to we're not talking about geographical proximity in this case, in soul connection, if you will, the closer you get to these models, if you will, for the brain and the heart of the Jewish people, the more you're feeling the life force, the more you're feeling the Kedusha, the holiness, not of place, as in Jerusalem, but of soul. Okay? Obviously what he's talking about is the dveikus of a chassid and his Rabbi, of a Talmud and his Rabbi. The closer you're connected to great and exalted souls, the more enlivened you are, the more vitalized you yourself are. So there's some other examples that maybe I'll get back to them if time allows. But this is, after all, I should say, advertised the class about the eyes. So let's move into the realm of the eyes. How are the eyes? How can we look at the human eye and talk about our eyes in general? Maybe some of what I'm going to say is true for non-human eyes as well, for animal eyes. How do we look at the eyes and draw lessons about ethics or about spirituality, about metaphysics? So again, I want to relate a few examples. Let's talk about the pupil. We know today that the pupil is not black tissue within the eye. Again, I don't know exactly what the ancients thought, but what a pupil is really it's a void. There's a lens behind the iris. It's like a good, very expensive camera with autofocus. In this case, it's not so much focusing, it's an aperture there that expands and contracts to compensate for the amount of light entering the eye. In very bright rooms, the pupil contracts. In very dark rooms, or in times of danger, the pupil expands. But really, it's not the pupil that's expanding and contracting. It's, I believe, the iris. Okay, here I'm revealing my ignorance of anatomy. Right? It's the iris that's really expanding and contracting. And the pupil is that black void, that nothingness that's really left behind in the wake of the expansion and contraction of the iris. And yet, it's this black void that allows for any kind of connection, of utilization of light that we have. Says the Medrash that the pupil is an allegory for the very creation of heaven and earth. Let's take a look in our Chumashim. We have the books on the table. We may as well use them. Page 3. Verse 2. The earth was without form and empty, with darkness on the face of the depths. But God's Spirit moved on the water surface. Now, Rabbi Kaplan translates it as without form and empty. Empty is really the point over here. Rashi, the famous Rashi, on the phrase tohu vavohu, is the Hebrew phrase for void and emptiness. Rashi says, Adam tohal abahu shabai. A person's mind is aghast, recoils from the emptiness of it. We can't really conceive of nothingness. What does real nothingness mean? Relatively speaking, you have a bowl and then you didn't put the salad in it. Okay, there's nothingness, there's a void, there's a vacuum there. But true, absolute nothingness is something beyond our ken. Right? And this was true, absolute void. Void, absolute nothingness. And that's related to darkness. And then verse 3, God said, let there be light. So light shines forth from voids that are dark. That's what a pupil is teaching us. Pupil harkens back to the very first creative act by God. There's a void, there's nothingness, and from there comes light. Our shaykhus, I don't know a good English word, our relationship with light altogether is predicated on this void, this darkness that we call a pupil. If the iris was totally solid, wonderful, more material, the more the better. No, we'd be blind. We need that void, we need that darkness to have any kind of perception of light whatsoever. There's a famous verse, I believe this is in Koheles, and it's really poetic the way the Zohar interprets it. It's a passage that says, Ki yisron ha'ar min ha'chosha, which simply, on a simple level means, as light is greater than darkness, so too, I forgot what the simile, how the verse ends. But the way the Zohar interprets it is, Leis nahara elahi denafik migo chashocha. There is no light except that which shines forth from the darkness. Ki yisron ha'ar min ha'chosha. The advantageousness of light is only when it comes from darkness. Something to bear in mind when your luck is down, when you're feeling darkness, and when you're feeling depressed. You have to understand that that is the way of the world. That is the cycle that God built into creation and into the cosmic nature and into human nature. There's always a void and an emptiness of a darkness before light can shine forth. There is no light, none whatsoever, except that which comes from darkness. Another thing. Okay, we are going to get to use our Sidurim. We are going to get to say Shir Shirim. Here I think I got it. I got the right verse. Take a look on page 300. Okay, I apologize to those of you who can't read the Hebrew. You'll bear with me. It's not a long passage. Page 300. Verse 9. Right? And you can see something about it on the in the footnote in the left-hand column, verse 9. But let me first read the pasuk. Before I read the pasuk, okay, whenever you talk to observant Jews today, and they want to talk about divine providence, they want to talk about God's involvement in their lives and in the world, the word they use is hashgacha. Okay, you sometimes go for us. Oh, I have a great hashgacha pratis story. Okay, hashgacha klolis, hashgacha pratis. Okay, anyone know what a mashgiach is?
Yeah.
What's a mashgiach, Diane?
A supervisor. What? A supervisor.
A supervisor in particular for what? The way we usually use it today? Kashrus. I'll tell you a funny story. When I was about 11, 12 years old, there was a little boy from the boondocks from Los Angeles, California, and my father, Zechron Levracha, and Lichten Gan Eden, took me on a trip to Israel. And we stopped in New York. My oldest brother was studying in one of the great yeshivas here on the East Coast. And I was a boy who grew up in Los Angeles. Where I grew up, the word mashgiach meant the guy who stands in the bakery who makes sure that they're not using, the animal fat shortening, in their cakes or something like that, right? No gelatin in the mashgiach, okay? So I come to a yeshiva gdal the first time in my life, and my brother takes me over to meet the mashgiach of the yeshiva, and I see a guy, he's a dignified man, very long, flowing white beard, a rabbinical frock coat, and he's sitting, he has his own little private table and podium towards the back of the Beis Medrash, and he's sitting and learning. And my brother introduces him, and he says, "This is the mashgiach of the yeshiva, this is my little brother." And the mashgiach asked me, this was about 9:30, I davened in the yeshiva that morning, I'd eaten breakfast. And the mashgiach asked me, he says, so, how do you like our yeshiva? So I thought it'd be clever. I said, well, look, put two and two together, mashgiach, okay, kosher supervisor, he must know a lot of halacha, he's an important rabbi. Yeah? He said, look, I haven't been here too long. All I did was daven and eat breakfast. But I can tell you one thing. As far as your department is concerned, the kitchen, the food, it was delicious, it was great. he started doing a slow burn. My brother grabbed me by the elbow. I think I still need reconstructive surgery today from that grab, and he scoots me out of there. He says, "You idiot! He's not that kind of mashgiach." What is a mashgiach? Some of you don't know the joke. The mashgiach in Musar type yeshivas, the mashgiach, like Betty Ann said, a mashgiach means a supervisor. Mashgiach literally means to watch, to see in an involved kind of way, not in a dispassionate, apathetic kind of a way. To look at something, okay, wanting things to turn out a certain way. That's what a mashgiach means. So in Musar yeshivas, the position of the mashgiach, the Rosh Yeshiva of the yeshiva, is the one who's teaching, like I said, meat and potatoes, Talmud, halachic issues, and the mashgiach is the guy who teaches, the Talmud Chacham, who teaches the ethical works. He's involved in the boys. He's the molder of young men and their ethical and moral development. And so that's a mashgiach. He's watching them. He's watching them with the idea of getting involved, supervising. That's a mashgiach. Okay, so whether you're talking about in a kitchen or in a bakery or in a restaurant, or you're talking in yeshiva, the idea of hashgacha, of that kind of vision, is not passive, is not dispassionate. It means with an eye, if you'll forgive the pun, to getting involved, and to controlling things, and to directing things. That's what hashgacha means. Now listen to this. We call divine providence hashgacha. Verse Tes, it's the second line on page 300. Domed Dodi litzvi o laofer hayolim. Hine ze omed acher koslenu. Mashgiach min achalonos, meitzis min acharakim. Okay, I'm going to skip the translation of the first part of the verse. It's talking about Dodi, my beloved. It's the Jewish people talking. The beloved in this context means God. He stands behind our walls. Perhaps they're lattice work walls. But this is what it says. Mashgiach min achalonos. He's being a mashgiach from the windows. Meitzitz min acharakim. He peers from the cracks. The walls have windows, big apertures that are meant to be big, and perhaps allow for two-way vision. But at the same time, he's a meitzitz min acharakim. He peers, he's peeking through little cracks in the lattice work on the walls. There's a footnote on 9. You can read it. I don't know if it has anything to do with the thrust of the class tonight, but at any rate. This is really the biblical source for this whole idea of calling God providence. Very hands-on involvement in the goings-on of the world, hashgacha. God is a mashgiach. My beloved is a mashgiach min achalonos. He watches watchfully in a supervisory way from the windows. There's another verse in the prophet Zechariah. This is Zechariah 4:10. That says, Shiva Ela, these 7, Einei Hashem, are the eyes of God. Mishotetim b'chol aretz. They cast about all over the land, all over the cosmos. Okay, so these are two of the main biblical verses that talk about God's involvement, God's direction, God's control of the world in terms of His vision, in terms of His eyes. Even in our modern literature, okay, we talk about Orwellian. Orwellian is usually an adjective for something creepy or spooky. But when we want to talk about big government, okay, cameras mounted everywhere, invasion of privacy, what do we say?
Orwellian.
What? Big Brother is watching. Yeah? Not Big Brother is punishing, not Big Brother is invading, Big Brother is watching. But we know, if he's watching, he's reacting. Okay? And the Jewish concept of, you don't get any bigger God is a Democrat. I don't know if he's voting for Hillary or Obama. He's definitely a believer in big government and invasive government. Maybe he's not a Democrat, maybe he's a communist, maybe he's a totalitarian. I don't know what you want to call it, okay? But invasion of privacy. Kol ma'asecha ayin raya. A person should always remember there is an eye watching. Okay? God is watching. You're not getting away with anything. Well, He seems to be turning a blind eye. I seem to have gotten away with a lot in my life. No. God is watching, and He's reacting, and He's controlling the whole time. You have to understand something also about the eyes. When we talk about God's involvement, being in terms of a watchful eye, eyes are a two-way street. We perceive reality through our eyes, but our eyes can give off tremendous expression as well. We talk about eyes having pathos. Pathos? I don't know, one of the two. We talk about eyes being the windows of the soul. Okay? You can tell a lot about a person emotionally through their eyes. You can tell a lot about their health. Okay? A good doctor can see high blood pressure by shining one of those lights in your eyes. Right? So when we talk about God's involvement in the world as being His eyes, He's using His eyes to look at the world, we have to understand that if He's using His eyes to look at us, we can look into His eyes and we can perceive something about Him, as it were, as well. People can say everything is causality, everything is by chance, everything is just dumb luck, or natural actions and reactions. Well, they can say no. There's an eye watching, there's reaction, there's involvement. You know something? I can look back into those eyes. And I can see pathos, I can see anger. Sometimes I can see looks to kill. I can see looks that are very sympathetic and very benevolent and empathetic. And that's how we refer to divine providence. You know, there's something very striking about the eyes as a sensory organ and as part of the human organism. I hope to talk about it in about 2 minutes. Our deepest sense of reality that's transmitted to the brain, all of our sensory perceptions, all of our 5 senses, whether it's smell, whether it's hearing, whether it's a sense of touch, but we say seeing is believing. Okay? Nothing is as real to us as what we perceive through our eyes. But there's something striking about our eyes. Our eyes are our most reliable, if you will, intelligence-gathering sources, and yet, of our whole organism, in a certain sense, they're least involved with the world. Compare our vision to our sense of touch. Our arms, our legs, they extrude from the body. They're involved in the world. They build things, they do things. But the point is, they're away from the trunk. And they're away, in a certain sense, our extremities are really the centers of our sense of touch. That's the real reality. That's, connecting with things. Right? Our eyes never leave our skull. They're tethered to the brain through an optic nerve. Some would argue they're part of the brain. Yeah? But they're there in the sockets. They never, we talk about Betty Davis eyes, the old cartoons, the eyes, like springs bouncing out of the body, but it's not the way a human organism really functions. The eyes see everything of this world. They take in everything of this world. They are our most reliable information gathering organs. And yet they're not part of this world. They're aloof. Still part of the skull. I think that's a very beautiful allegory for divine providence. It's very hard to perceive God. This kind of involvement, that kind of providence, a hand reaching down from heaven and relighting our Shabbos candles, like in Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach's, famous Shabbos story. Most of us don't have that. Most of us don't sense divine providence that way. And that's why it's spoken about, I believe, biblically and in the words of our sages and the later Jewish literature as hashgacha. It's supervisory. It's very involved, but it's an eye. It's aloof. It's removed. You're not going to see that kind of, if you will, hands-on involvement. All right, as you will with hands. If hands had been, you could have called divine providence God's handiwork. Apparently, would have been a more apt metaphor. But we don't speak about it that way. We've been talking about God so far. Let's talk about the flip side. How should we use our eyes? Studying the eyes, what lessons do we take as human beings, as Jews, as Ovdei Hashem, as servants of God? What are we supposed to take out of an understanding of the eyes? Well, the first thing that we should understand is the power of the eyes. And I always tell you about, my absolute value theory of spirituality. What has a tremendous power for good has a tremendous power for evil, and vice versa. Let's take a look again at Bereshis. And the first sin, the fall of humanity. So we're used to thinking of the idea of, the fall of humanity has something to do with ingestion, with eating. They ate of the forbidden fruit, and that was the sin. Right? Well, that was the ultimate, the final straw, if you will, in the way the sin culminated. But look at how it began.
What page?
We're looking on page 13. Take a look at the seduction of the snake and the seduction of the tree that we're talking about. Page 13, let's start with verse 4. The serpent said to the woman, "You will certainly not die. Really, God knows that on the day that you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." That snake oil merchant, known as the snake, as the primordial serpent, is selling amplified vision. Your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God yourself. The greater the vision, the more godlike. The pitch was not how delicious the fruit is. And forbidden fruits are always sweeter, right? King Solomon writes, Mayan genuvim yimtaku. Even water, tasteless, odorless water, if it's stolen, it becomes sweet. Right? And we think, well, that was the appeal. It's taboo. You can't do it, so it must taste really good. No. It's going to amplify your vision. You know what kind of beta carotene was in that tree of knowledge of good and evil? Now, let's read the next verse. The woman saw that the tree was good to eat and desirable to the eyes. How do you see if something's good to eat? You want to tell me you smell? It's got a nice aroma. You want to say, give me a little taste sample, a free sample. Okay, it tastes good to eat. She saw that it was good to eat. And it was desirable to the eyes. It's all about vision. Yes, Elise, what do you want to say?
I was just going to say that you can see, or you could perceive that something looks good to eat with your eyes, and it looks so beautiful, it's formed nice, the color is pleasing.
Okay.
But then it doesn't have flavor.
You know, if you read restaurant reviews as much as I do, you know, my masochistic streak, I always read about these trade for restaurants. You will see that once in a while there's a lot of sizzle but no steak. You know, things get very high points for presentation, but it tastes putrid. So that's why, even though we say that our eyes are our most reliable, but you would think if you're talking about food, give her a smell, give her a little sample, a little taste. No, it looks good. Okay. About this, let's go back to our Sidurim for a second, and here's a very famous verse that I'm sure you've all heard and you've all read, and here we do have our English translation. Let's go for the first place we have in the Siddur. I can show you in the Chumash also, but it's more convenient to look at the Siddur. Page 94. Page 94, the top, 95, we're doing the English. Okay, the top paragraph that begins with Vayomer, and Hashem said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 lines on the top, last word on the line. And not explore after your heart and after your eyes, after which you stray. The Hebrew reads, V'lo sasuru acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem asher atem zonim achareim. Stray is actually a pretty mild, polite translation. Zonim has a connotation of marital infidelity. Okay, don't go after your eyes and after your heart that you commit adultery with. It's really would be a more literal translation. Okay, so sin in general is considered an act of infidelity, an act of violation of our covenant of love with God. Okay, and what makes you stray? Your eyes and your heart. The Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, Tractate Brachos, says, this is chapter 1, section 5 in the Jerusalem Talmud. Said Rabbi Levi, the eyes and the heart are two scouts, are two agents for sin. As it says in Mishlei, it says in Proverbs, give me, my son, your heart and your eyes, and you will observe my ways. If you give to me, God is saying, your heart and your eyes, then I know that you are mine. You are my son. You're faithful to me. And Rashi, ad locum, there's a biblical passage that we're saying in Kriya Shema. Rashi says, on the spot, he says, Halev v'ha'einayim shnei sesurechet. The heart and the eyes are these two scouts for sin. Ha'ayin roeh v'halev chomed. The eye observes, and the heart starts to yearn, starts to lust. Imagine how much simpler our lives would be. How much how much less jealousy we'd be experiencing in our lives. Okay? If either we didn't look as much at things as all the pretty baubles that Madison Avenue stretches out for us to create a need for, if the consumers who live next door to us were not so much into conspicuous consumption, okay, they're there for us to see it and to grow jealous of it, but imagine if it wasn't that way. If we just controlled our eyes a little better, our hearts would be much less yearning. Right? So, if the eyes have this power for evil, if we're saying those are the two main agents for sin, obviously the eyes also have the ability to see things that would cause a yearning for something good, for something positive, for something holy. Can't be the other way around. Can't be the God, so to speak, stack the deck that terribly against our favor. That the eyes should be something that we're capable of bringing us to great sin, but not something that's capable of bringing us to great kedusha. I said before that our eyes are our confirmation of reality. There's a great Talmudic dictum that ain't a dome as shmiya l'riyah. You can't compare hearing something to seeing something. And that has many ramifications. Let me first give you a halakhic ramification, and then I'll give you a homiletic one. In laws of Jewish jurisprudence, you have a Sanhedrin, you have a Beis Din, you have a Jewish court of law, ecclesiastical law. Hearsay evidence is inadmissible. It says, Al pi shnayim eidim yakum davar, by the mouth of two eidim shall a thing be established. One of the drashos, one of the laws that's extrapolated from that biblical verse is, mi pi shnayim eidim v'lo eid mi pi eid. The court has to hear it directly from the witnesses. The witnesses cannot have heard it from other witnesses and then secondhand relate it to the court. Reuben and Shimon come into court and they say, we saw Moshe kill Aharon. We have a court case. We have a homicide case on our hands. Reuben and Shimon come into court and they say, Levi and Yehuda, two impeccable people of the finest character, told us that they witnessed Moshe kill Aaron. Inadmissible. Meaningless. And a doma shmiya l'riyah. You cannot compare what people saw to what people heard. That's one example. Another is this. Let's take a look. You got the Living Torah open. Let's take a look. Dvarim Chavtes. Yes. Chavtes. Let me give you Chavtes Aleph. Okay, page 1009. And the section that says Moses' final discourse. Page 1009. Flip a lot of pages at one time. Go for the gusto. It goes quicker that way. Okay? We up to 1009? Okay, 1009. Section 139 or chapter 29, however you want to do it. Moses summoned all of Israel and said to them, okay, this is the valedictory address. There are still people under the age of 60. They're about to cross the Jordan River. Moshe Rabbeinu is about to die. But there are still people who were born and were basically adults, 19 years old, during the Exodus of Egypt. They saw everything. They saw the 10 plagues. They saw the parting of the Sea of Reeds. They saw the manna bread. They saw the pillar of cloud. They saw the revelation at Sinai. They saw the swallowing up of Korach and his congregation. All the miracles. They were eyewitnesses to all of these miracles. Says Moshe Rabbeinu to them, you have seen all that God did in Egypt before your very eyes, to Pharaoh, to all his servants, and to all his land. Your own eyes saw the great miracles, signs, and wonder. Says Rashi, ad locum, on this, okay? Lo b'misores hi bi'etchem. It's not a tradition. It's experiential. Your eyes beheld this. I could not be making this speech to any other generation in the Jewish people than to you. You people are eyewitnesses. Okay, on a mystical level, we say every Jewish soul that ever existed was present at Sinai. But on a physical, flesh and blood human experience, This was the generation that saw it. One of the great contemporary Jewish thinkers, Schwartz, used to say about this is why the generation of the Exodus is known as the Dar Deya, the generation of knowledge. Not because they were more brilliant or had higher IQs than any subsequent generation, because seeing is knowledge. Comparatively speaking to all subsequent Jewish generations, this was the generation that really knew it. They didn't have to believe it, they didn't have to accept it on tradition, on hearsay, one witness from another witness, from another witness, stretching back 1,000 generations. They saw it. So again, I'm trying to bring out the relative advantage of our vision, of using our eyes to see things vis-a-vis other ways of gathering data, of relating, of using our senses to relate to the world. Our sages say, very, very fascinating Chazal, if you go through the Book of Lamentations, it's the Megillah that we read on Tisha B'Av. So there are many chapters there that are arranged in an alphabet acrostic, like many things in our davening and Tehillim and so on and so forth. It goes through runs through the gamut of the Aleph base. There's only one problem. The letter Pei is before the letter Ayin. Let me illustrate to you. For you those who are not familiar with what I'm talking about, let me show you a very common example. In your Siddur, starting on page 66. So in the English, 67, continuing through 69. Let's go on the English side, 67 through 69. Ashrei. If you look at Ashrei, you'll see the extreme left-hand margin of the page. Okay, vertically, going down. Okay, think of it as Chinese, not Hebrew. You're not reading it right to left, you're reading it up to down. See how it goes on 67? Aleph, Beis, Gimel, next page. Daled, Hey, Vav, and it goes through the alphabet sequentially. There are chapters in the Book of Lamentations that work the same way, with only one problem. The Ayin and the Pei are inverted. The Pei verse, the verse that begins with the letter Pei, Peh is a Hebrew, the letter is called Peh, and a human mouth is also called a Peh. Right? Comes before the letter Ayin. Ayin is the name of a letter, but Ayin is also the Hebrew singular for the word for an eye. A Nayim is eyes, one eye is an Ayin. Say the sages in the Medrash on Eicha, why is it that this alphabet is out of order, and that's the only two letters that are out of sequence? And they answer, because we all know that the main sin that caused the exile, the loss of the land of Israel, and the destruction of the temple was the sin of the spies. What did the spies do wrong? Hikdimu peh la'ayin. They put their mouths before their eyes. They gave precedence to their mouths. They were witnessing things that their eyes never beheld. They gave testimony to things that they never saw. Churban, destruction, void, entropy. The opposite of reality is when we give precedence to other things before our eyes. See things and then talk. Don't talk and first see things. Remember how we learned before in Shir Hashirim that my beloved looks from the windows and peers from the cracks? Rav Shlomo Freifeld, the family Rosh Yeshiva Shayoshev from Far Rockaway, said a beautiful insight. I'll take his word for it because the Zohar is not on my reading list. But the Zohar is the main text of Jewish mysticism, or traditionally we hold it was written by a Tana, by one of the authors of the Mishnah, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. And they're both written in Aramaic. The Zohar is perhaps a more pure Aramaic than the Talmud. This is a very striking difference between the way a Talmudic discussion traditionally begins and between the way a Zoharic discussion traditionally begins. The expression throughout the Talmud is Ta Shema, Aramaic for come and hear. You want to explain something, you want to examine something, you want to analyze something, come and hear. The corollary expression throughout the Zohar is Ta Chazi, come and look, come take a look. Said Rav Shlomo Freifeld, the outer trappings of the Torah, the easily accessible, really what's visual to the naked mental eye, if you will, parts of the Torah, ritual, halacha, the way we behave, the way to live as a Jew, an ox goring a cow, the 4 types of guards, of shomrim, how to make a bracha, and so on and so forth. The revealed part of the Torah is revealed. But Ochenata Kel Mistata, God is concealed behind that. We're dealing with God, and we can hear God's voice from behind the curtain, but you can't really see God. The mystical part of the Torah, the inner core of the Torah, you've parted the curtain. There you're seeing God. So the Gemara always talks about come and hear, said Rav Shlomo Freifeld. The Zohar always talks about come and see, come take a look. You want to really look, you want to see, up close and personal, the real reality, the more perceivable, if you will, part of God, that's the mystical core behind the halachic trappings. I want to offer my own humble observation about something that we can learn from the eye. You know, biologists talk about a blind spot. Every eye has a blind spot, and if I had time, I've overspoken the limits, so I don't have time, but there are experiments you can do. There's about a 1 millimeter blind spot that even the healthiest eye has. It's where the iris, I believe it is, where the optic nerve, what is the part of the eye that leads into the optic nerve? The retina. Okay, the retina wall coalesces into the optic nerve. There's a certain millimeter by millimeter diameter spot over there with no nerve endings whatsoever. With no cones and rods. What are they called? Bipolar cells, ganglion cells. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Okay, and these are all the things that transmit vision and color and sharpness and focus through the optic nerve to the brain, where the brain actually perceives an image. There's a blind spot there. There's a very big argument between creationists / intelligent designers, which I suppose I'm a member of that camp, and evolutionists, because the eye is usually, and again, because it's not my area of expertise, so I'm not here to snow anybody and pretend that I'm a big biologist or anatomist when I'm not. I did not concentrate tonight's talk on examining the wonders of the eye. However, go online and you'll see. Or buy some books, go to your local library. Those who promote the argument for intelligent design, the eye is one of their favorite organs. The marvelous wonders of the construction of the eye alone is, the watch that's testifying about the watchmaker. However, some evolutionists say if this was really an intelligent designer, the way the screen is set up, I forgot how it's numbered, but one of their arguments is, why would an engineer, this is a flaw in the design, why should there be a spot on the eye that has a blind spot? Right? And there's certain mollusks, octopuses, I think, that don't have this blind spot. And we're supposed to be more evolved, or if you're a creationist, a higher organism in the hierarchy of reality than are the octopi. So why don't we have eyes without a blind spot? Here's another thing. We all know there's something called peripheral vision, and the lack of peripheral vision. It's because our eye muscles are so well coordinated and move almost unconsciously that we sometimes fail to realize how poor our peripheral vision is. Chalila, God forbid, you get macular degeneration when you get a little over and you lose your straight vision, then you first begin to understand how poor your peripheral vision is. And the movement of your eye muscles isn't really going to compensate anymore because you can't see straight on with your. So these are two counter-arguments that are very often brought by proponents against intelligent design. How could it be intelligent? If there was an intelligent designer, why the blind spot? Why such poor peripheral vision? I would add another thing. I play the game of Boggle very often. If you ever played the game of Boggle, those of you not familiar, it's a bunch of letters on a cube and a grid, and there's a little egg timer over there, and you've got 3 minutes, and you're supposed to form as many words as you can, and as many words that you form, the opponents playing the game, the other contestants playing the game, didn't have, you get X amount of points for it. 3-letter word is worth X, 4-letter word, and so on and so forth. And it's a marvelous thing when you play Boggle. Usually, as soon as the grid goes down and the cover is lifted off, people are writing their words as fast as these little primitive word processors called hands carrying pens and pencils can carry them. And then about 30 or 40 seconds, the action starts to slow down and finally the pens drop. And then one of the contestants invariably will say, do you mind if we flip the grid and you move it 90 degrees or 180 degrees? And all of a sudden the pens pop back up Tchias HaMesim, resurrection of the dead, they're writing again. And invariably, almost all the time, it's in middle of the round, a minute and a half into the 3-minute round, that you're getting all of your opponent's words. In other words, they were across the table from you, they saw the grid one way, now you flip it around, now you see all the words that they saw. Right? Viewpoint. Perception is very subjective. As simple as, forget about it, I'm not talking about experience and education and height and depth of perception and so on and so forth. Just coming at something from a different angle. Tabula rasa, I had no feelings or perceptions about the Bible game 10 minutes ago, or about at least this particular grid in the Bible game. And yet it's so altered by viewpoint. Why is viewpoint so important? Why is peripheral vision so important? Why do we have blind spots? Okay? And these are supposedly arguments against intelligent design. And my answer to that is, on the contrary. The intelligent designer, Yisbarach, may he be blessed, built this in to the machinery of the eye so that creatures would never confuse and conflate their role with that of creator. What did the snake say to Eve? You augment your vision, you're God. Perfect vision, mashgiach min hachalonos, meitzim min hacharakim, gazing from the windows, peering from the cracks. That's Dovid. That's my beloved. That's God. I'm a human being. The eye may be marvelous. The eye may be my most real perceptor of reality. The generation that made the exodus from Egypt, they're the generation of knowledge because they're the generation of eyes. You saw it with your own eyes. But you're not God. You have a blind spot. You can't see things from all angles. Viewpoint does color your perception of reality. You can't see all the words in the grid just by virtue of your position. You change position, you'll see more. But until you change position, and you cannot be all places at all times, like I, God, can. So I think that's one of the great messages, not just of the wonders of how empowered we are by our eyes, but at the same time how limited we are. We do have a blind spot. We do have peripheral vision. We do have limitations of viewpoint. And that's something that I think all of us should remember when we're saying, yes, the eyes have it. They got the it factor, so to speak. They have the it factor, but they don't have the he, uppercase. Or if you want to go with a gender-neutral God, they don't have the it, uppercase it. And that's my class for tonight. And you'll forgive me. Anyone who wants to, I can share with you things from Hebrew books, not from anatomical books, from rabbinical books, about the wondrous function of the eye biologically and anatomically. And for those of us who would rather do the end part of the sin of the tree of knowledge of good and evil and feed our mouths rather than our eyes, there's a collation in the next room. And loyal Ad Merklinger is getting our drinks as well. And that's it for tonight. God willing, next week.